Well, this is no ordinary episode of the Superhero Homies podcast. Today, I have two very, very special and unique guests here. Probably two of the most overqualified people to ever speak on the podcast, and by a long shot. I have here with me clinical psychologist Lynn Zabernis. Did I pronounce that correctly, Lynn?
You did.
Excellent. And also have here with me licensed professional counselor Matthew Snyder.
That's
Matt,
me.
Lynn, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Thank you for having us.
Yeah,
Yes.
we're looking forward to it.
Absolutely. You know, when your publicist Heather reached out, at first, I was like, "Is this a joke? Like, why?" First of all, the only reason why, like, any kind of professional counselor or clinical psychologist would want to speak to me would be for my own personal issues, and certainly not for anything pertaining to the realm of comic books or superheroes. So I was extremely delighted to see that no, there's actually really awesome books, Supes Ain't Always Heroes, that's coming out really soon that you guys wanted to speak about.
Yes. Sorry, we can't give you any free therapy today, so no.
Completely understandable. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So first of all, you guys are co-editors on this book, and Supes Ain't Always Heroes is a book that is about all of the different aspects of the Boys TV show. And a lot of people have watched the Boys TV show, and they've taken a lot of things away from that show because there's so much in that show, more than on the surface level. It is, action and maybe crass humor, and maybe a lot of gore for those who like that. But just go one, maybe two layers underneath that, there's a very nuanced show that has a lot of very interesting talking points and discussions. And when I was able to get a PDF file of the book earlier, and I was able to kind of read through it, and it really opened my kind of my thinking and my viewpoints as to a lot of the different aspects about this TV show. I and some of my other co-hosts, we reviewed the seasons as they came out. It's interesting how a lot of those talking points were greatly expounded upon in this book. Matt and Lynn, can you guys both kind of tell me about your history with the Boys, how you guys kind of came into this show, and what led to the formation of this book?
Sure. I'll start because I think I fell into it a little more quickly than Matt. I actually fell into it because I'm a huge fan of everything Eric Kripke does. I fell in love with his work on Supernatural. A lot of the books that I've published have been about Supernatural, and I've written some with the cast of Supernatural. So that show has my heart. So I think Kripke is so brilliant that I will give anything that he does a chance. So when he had a new show coming out, The Boys, I was right there from episode 1 watching it. I never know if I'm really going to fall hard for something he does. I always like his work, but this is only the second time that I have really just fallen in love with a show. And I did from the very beginning. So I started watching it in season 1. I started reviewing it also, like you, in the beginning, was writing reviews for it. And as the seasons went on, by the time we got to the end of season 2, I was so fascinated with it that I was unfortunately already thinking, oh, I think this is going to have to be a book, because I keep trying to stop writing books, but I keep getting fascinated with things. And then I find that I have to do books about them. So that's what happened. And I am loving it even more after seeing season 3 and also watching the spin-off Gen V.
Yep. And of course, I kind of got into it because Lynn dragged me into it. So we're also professors at a local university, in the Philadelphia area, Westchester University. And she basically came in and said, "You have to watch this show. You have to watch the show." And she said the same thing about Supernatural. And I watched it, but I didn't really get as hooked. I grew up with Star Wars and Batman and Superman, and those are the kind of things that I was an avid watcher of The Walking Dead, and those kinds of shows. I just kind of ways to get away from what I do on a daily basis, which is talk about people's problems. But then I got totally sucked in, and the wild thing about something like The Boys is that not only is it interesting and dynamic, and the characters are wonderful, but it has so much to say about society, about being a human, about the human struggles, which I didn't want to. I'm a therapist. I want to turn that off. I want to watch football and watch Walking Dead and have fun with all that kind of stuff. But it's a show that really makes you think, and I think that's how I got super sucked into it.
Excellent. You guys mentioned all those points about what kind of drew you into it, and then what kept you there. And I mean, in so many ways, I'm in full agreement, and it has to have me thinking. I imagine that a lot of people kind of fell into the show the same way, maybe watching it for one thing, escapism, or another, or because Eric Kripke, like Lynn said, that the first 5 seasons of Supernatural, in my opinion, the best 5 seasons of Supernatural. And
Agreed.
And then went on to co-create the Boys TV show, and it's been a phenomenon because it does really touch on so many different social aspects, so many different things about people, and it comes down to this, right? Like on the surface level, some people may look at this and think this is just a show about another variation of evil Superman, and as someone who I'm quite the comic nerd myself, I can say with surety this is not a show about an evil Superman.
Mm-hmm.
We've had plenty of different media, different animated movies or TV shows or comic books even to explore evil Superman. This is not that. If you want to talk about Homeland in particular, he's just more about what if someone who was absolutely corrupted and rotten had the powers of Superman. That is not the same thing as, say, an evil Superman. So those type of analogs in the show I think are really interesting because they're so much more nuanced than maybe what people think upon first glance.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's like, what if you gave regular, normal people, both good, bad, and otherwise, just people walking around like us, if you gave them V and superpowers, what would happen? And that's exactly what The Boys is about.
Right. And what I love about that is that as the show has gone on, we've got to see people who were so vehemently against all things Supes, looking at you, Butcher, and seeing what happens when they get a glimpse, right? And
it goes so far as to actually he takes the compound V.
Right.
And doesn't want to stop taking it either.
Right. And so, what does that make him? It's such an interesting dynamic here. And, I can't wait to see where the show goes next season. And Lynn, I know you mentioned that you've seen Gen V up until this point. How about you, Matt? Have you had the opportunity to watch any of it yet?
I'm almost through it. Yeah. So again, excellent. It's almost like same kind of thing. What if we gave a bunch of teenagers, V? What would happen? It's such an interesting. Yeah. And that's what drew me. I'm like, oh, okay. Now we get to see what that would be like if we gave a bunch of freshman college, kids V, or what would happen to them.
Yeah, I wasn't sure that I would love Gen V because I am far from being a college age person. So I thought, well, am I really going to be able to relate to this? But it's brilliant in the same way that Buffy was brilliant. Buffy was ostensibly on the surface about high schoolers, but Buffy was really about so much more. Gen V is about so much more. And you started to talk about, it's not as simple as this is evil Superman. And even people who you think are vehemently against something like Compound V end up taking it. I love that the Boys universe is never black and white. People are not all good or all evil. Everybody's got shades of gray in them. That is so real. As therapists, we deal with that all the time in our professional life. It is shades of gray. The world is all shades of gray. And I love that this universe reflects that.
Yeah, and it does, right? Almost to a scary extent. because I'll mention this one more kind of anecdotal thing that I saw from, I think, season 2. And then I want to talk about this book and some of the fascinating components that I was able to find here in this book that you guys edited and compiled. I believe it was an episode in season 2. And this is probably segue perfectly into like how this show holds up a funhouse mirror to society in so many ways, particularly like the fake news or the propaganda or the making things into media bite-sized portions for society. But it was a cold open that they did for one of the episodes, I believe, in season 2, and it was about this guy who was just living his normal life, and he would go to the corner store every day, and he would buy something from the store, and he'd go home and he'd go back and watch the news, and it'd be all about things happening in the world and how things are terrible because of this soup or that soup, or and it became kind of a fear-mongering thing for him, and he became paranoid. And one day he goes to the same corner store and to speak to the same shop owner or clerk they would speak to every day, and he thought he saw something in the clerk's eye, and he kills him.
Yep.
And I remember that vehemently because, man, that really struck me, because there's been so many times where we have seen something similar to this happen in reality, where people allow news or media to influence them to a degree where they become paranoid, or they find what they're looking for, even if there's no there there. How do you guys feel about this show's, not its impact, but how do you feel about its reflection on modern day media and social media frenzy and how it impacts people?
I think it's spot on. And I find that on the one hand really terrifying, because not only are people influenced by media, but what the show, one of the main things it's trying to show is how people who are in power manipulate the messages and manipulate the media to create that paranoia and to create that fear. And unfortunately, that really happens. Like, that is a mirror on what often happens in our own world. And I think part of me is just terrified about that and wishes that it wasn't true. And the other part kind of feels strangely validated. It's like, okay, I see all these things happening that I really wish were not happening and I think are really dangerous for the world and for this country and for everywhere. But it feels kind of good to know that other people see it too. Like, it's validating in some way to know that the people who are making this show are also seeing these dangerous things happening, and they want to hold up a mirror to it so that maybe people can see it a little more clearly in fictional form, because people don't see it a lot in reality. We would prefer not to think that we're being manipulated like that. So I think it's a really good thing socially wise that it's actually doing that.
All right. What about you, Matt? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I actually talk a little bit about that specific scene in my chapter on toxic masculinity and kind of indoctrination, and then we talk a lot about, like, passed down values and vulnerability, and you could see that that character, that individual, was extremely vulnerable and lonely at that point, and he basically fed into this belief or this lie, basically, that the world is dangerous and it's out to get you. And yeah, to a certain extent that might be true, but then you have to do something about it, and you have to join in the fight, so to speak. And it's really interesting about safety and security, and also like personal freedoms. Like what would make somebody take it upon themselves to not call the police, or not to let somebody else know, but to actually attack another person because they thought that possibly they were the quote unquote enemy. And media makes a lot of enemies. And because that sells, and that and also there's kind of a part of toxic masculinity that kind of makes other people non-human, right? There was no kind of belief in that guy's eyes that that person was a real person in front of them with a family and a background and an experience. If he did feel that, it certainly got washed away by the influence of the media.
Yeah. that I think that amongst other things is one reason why the show has done so well is because it really has. Okay, so for example, you like Matt and Lynn here, you two are experts, in this field of thinking for a living and analyzing. But I can speak on behalf of us normal plebs. We are we are not, we are not so it easily able to understand the kind of the ebbs and flows of things like this. And so when a nerd such as myself watches something like The Boys, I'm like, hey, wait a minute. I think this is telling me something. Right.
Tell you a lot of things, actually, if you really
Yeah.
look at it. Yeah.
But it's so entertaining that it's almost like you don't realize. I mean, same. My reaction was the same as yours. Like at first, you're just entertained, and you're like, "Oh my God, did they really go there?" And "Oh my God, can they get away with that?" And then when it's over and you think about the episode, it really starts to sink in, and you're like, "Wait a minute, I think there was a lot more depth here than it seemed on the surface." And I love that. It's a way of getting a message to people who might usually not be open to it. They wouldn't probably go to a lecture on the way the media can manipulate public opinion and create paranoia. If somebody gave a lecture on that at the local university, people wouldn't go, but they'll watch The Boys and they'll get that same message.
Yeah. Yeah, and like you said, it's because they packaged it up in such a wonderful little gore, dark humor filled package for you, and they make it very consumable. Putting the dog some medicine in the bologna. It's kind of what it is. And
Well, I think the other thing too is that it gives you a lot of people to relate to, whether it's Mother's Milk or Frenchie or Huey, Starlight. I think there's always a character that somebody can kind of gravitate to, and even sometimes the villains people can gravitate to. I mean, Lynn will talk a lot about her favorite character. I'll let her say who that is in a second. But it's not just the quote unquote the boys, the good side characters we root for or can relate to. I mean, Deep is extremely relatable as a character, right?
Right. I gotta say, I'll go ahead and reveal the truth of it here. Well, my favorite character and the character who I relate to are so different.
Well, that's a really good
same,
point.
Same.
I'll go ahead and say this, and this is purely from just an entertainment standpoint and maybe an acting standpoint, but Anthony Starr as Homelander, I cannot get enough of him. Every time I see that guy on screen, he's captivating and he's menacing and he's terrifying, but he's cool hand Luke until he's not. There's so much there. But Matt, just kind of circling back to what you mentioned earlier about your chapter on toxic masculinity, who I relate to the most and who I believe has another chapter in the book on toxic masculinity is Huey. I feel the most kind of kinship with Huey, and because a lot of that has to do with the fact that what do you do sometimes when you feel hopeless, and then you get this this kind of corrupt cop-esque father figure and butcher, and then finding your own identity and finding your own path to masculinity, yourself. So I thought that his whole arc so far has been just amazing. Actually, so many of these arcs with these characters have been amazing. There's something to pick apart with almost all of these main characters. A-Train got a phenomenal arc come around.
Absolutely.
And I thought that was also tremendous. But circling back to toxic masculinity, we can stay here for a bit because there's a lot to be discussed there in terms of this TV show. For me, and certainly I want you guys' input and to fill in my blanks here, but I would say there's probably 3, maybe 4 primary characters who we get different aspects of toxic masculinity. I would say Huey, Butcher, Homelander, and now I would have to add in Soldier Boy. We don't know what the future holds for him, but I certainly would think that those 4 characters have like kind of 4 different aspects or pinpoints of toxic masculinity. It's interesting, right? Because they're all in their different ways trying to argue that their way is right. But the truth of it is more complex than that. And I think they're all coming around to that. So what are you guys' take on those characters and how they influence toxic masculinity?
Yeah, I think I'll tackle Homelander, and then I'll let Lynn tackle Soldier Boy, and then we can certainly loop back around and talk about Huey and Butcher. So if you think about Homelander, like you said, he's such an engaging and interesting character. And if you asked Homelander, he would say that he's in the right and that he does, for the right for the most people, and that he's got a righteous cause. It's really interesting, if you look at his backstory, and that's one of the things that I think makes the boys so interesting and creative, is that every character has this well-developed backstory that tries to kind of, it doesn't try, it does, it explains and nuances the characters, and we kind of figure out where they come from. So if you think about Homelander, he was grown up in a lab, and he had this kind of evil doctorish kind of person as his father. And he was taught, ideas about Western expansion, and that you can take things away from the Native Americans because it's your God-given right. And he was also trained to not show weakness. Right. And he was trained to, get your needs met despite other people. And if you think of toxic masculinity, or if you think of masculinity in general, there's nothing wrong with masculinity. Like there's lots of positive aspects. But when it gets toxic is when it becomes a narcissistic stance of, I have to get my needs met at the kind of cost of someone else. And really, toxic masculinity comes from a very kind of insecure place. And if you look at Homelander, he is extremely insecure on some level, right? And he is always asking for the love of the masses. In fact, right, when Stormfront, gets all this kind of love and admiration through social media, Homelander is completely perplexed at that, right? How can people not love me? And yet he's so kind of disconnected from empathy that he literally throws a person off a building that has just decided she doesn't want to commit suicide, right? And he's like, I don't care, you're going to die because it's going to further my cause. And that's toxic masculinity in a nutshell. I don't care about you. I'll do whatever it takes to kind of further my cause, because on some level, I need that, because on some level, I can't care about anybody else but me.
Right.
Yeah.
It really
go
is.
ahead.
Sorry, Lynn, not to cut you
No,
off.
no.
So much of it really is about that bruised ego, like you mentioned, Matt, about having that sick kind of overly severe sensitivity to maybe what other people think, and it has been heightened by the likes of social media. And when you compound that with the boys universe, the superheroes are also celebrities. They're the biggest celebrities. They have movies and TV deals and action figures and this, that, and the third. And so you look at all that celebrityism and the fact that Homelander is clearly a narcissist of the worst degree.
Oh yeah.
You have just a cauldron full of just mixtures that's ready to bubble over.
And I'll bridge into what Lynn's going to talk about. What makes Soldier Boy so interesting is I don't think he's such as narcissistic, as Homelander, and actually he has a lot of self-awareness, and he's pretty cool with who he is on some level. So anyway, I'll let you talk about your favorite character there, Lynn.
Not the character that I relate to. Let me make that clear. Just my favorite character. And I mean, I think that Homelander and Soldier Boy are really popular characters because oftentimes the villains are written as the most complex characters, and they get the most amazing lines. There was just a Gen V episode where Soldier Boy appeared, and I mean, every word he said was both gross and hilarious and fascinating. And these villains, they can do what they want, and that makes them very attractive. But I agree with Matt. I mean, Soldier Boy was the character that the show used to really primarily explore toxic masculinity in season 3. That's what the arc, not the only arc, but a major arc of the season was.
Mm-hmm.
But Soldier Boy shows toxic masculinity in kind of a more realistic way, also like a more traditional way. It was really brilliant to use a character that has been asleep, has been on ice, restrained for a long time, is actually quite old and quite traditional, and especially the masculinity that he was raised with at the time. He woke up with all those traditional views still there. So his version of toxic masculinity, it's not as extreme as Homelander's. He wasn't raised in a lab. He was raised, by a family, but with a father who showed all the worst traits of toxic masculinity himself, rejected his son for not being good enough, for not living up to those unrealistic expectations. And then, for a while, it looks like maybe Soldier Boy is going to go against those and actually kind of throw that off and not become his dad. But in the end, he sounds just like his dad. He says to his son, "You're a fucking disappointment."
Right.
And he rejects him. And it's heartbreaking because you did see him struggle with it a little bit. And you see him struggle with like, I'm not a bad guy. I'm kind of a hero. I see myself as a hero, but he couldn't break away from it. And there's something heartbreaking about that.
Yeah. When I think about Soldier Boy, he was such a volatile element that was added to the show that I didn't realize how much I needed until I got it. and I mean that in all the best ways, of course. Like his brand of masculinity, like you said, Lynn, I couldn't agree more. It's so old fashioned, right? And it really is like, what if Captain America turned out just to be the worst of that era, brought back here in this time frame. But yeah, I've just always thought that Soldier Boy, the interesting thing about him was when kind of the story came full circle, he was maybe the only person who had the opportunity to corral Homelander and to maybe make something better of him. And that's where the ironic part comes from, right? Because real masculinity would have been to try to help Homelander, right? To try to talk him down and to explain to him, because that was Homelander really looked to Soldier Boy as a father in those few instances. He was so happy and so relieved, and Soldier Boy just did what Soldier Boy does, and he just shat all over it.
Yeah, followed his father's script. And I mean, that's the thing that the boys get so right. It's so hard in reality for us as humans to break away from those scripts. Even when we get some insight and we become aware of those scripts that we're following, it's really hard not to just fall right back into them and start playing them out all over again. And it's really heartbreaking to see.
Mm-hmm.
So what do we think about Butcher in terms of toxic masculinity? Because for a lot of people, he's if not the primary protagonist, then the secondary, at least up until season 3. So what do we think about Butcher's role?
Go ahead, Matt. What do you think about Butcher's
Sure.
role?
I will swing it. I'll take a swing at Butcher. So again, I think the interplay between Butcher and Huey, especially in the first several seasons, but especially season 1, was kind of one of the center kind of catalysts that drove the show. Butcher is such an interesting character because, again, like, he is a narcissist on some very distinct level, and he puts all the other boys down by calling them female body parts, right? You're a such and such, and it's so funny because at one point Huey, and I'll try, I'm not going to use expletive, but Huey said, well, you can call me that. Like, it's flexible and it's strong and it comes back, and like, you call me that all you want. That's not necessarily a bad thing. But Butcher likes to keep people in line, right? And Butcher's a narcissist because what he wants is revenge, right? He wants revenge on Homelander, and especially when he thought his wife was dead, and there wasn't anybody was not going to get in the way of that. Right. And on some real kind of, very kind of nasty level, he used Huey to get what he wanted. Right. He saw a vulnerable kid. He saw a kid that just lost his love of his life. and he was going to use him. And one of the first scenes is, very of this is he gets him to put like a bug, in the tower, in Vought Tower. And again, like Butcher doesn't give a shit about anybody but Butcher and what he needs to do. And maybe, he kind of couches it in that, it's the good guys against the bad guys. But make no mistake, right? He is out for vengeance, and he'll take down. And he took down, on lots of different levels, Starlight and Frenchie and Mother's Milk, and I think Frenchie and Mother's Milk in particular have a lot of conflict with Butcher because they see that they're being used. And Frenchie says at one point, it's a great, Lynn and I talk about this scene all the time. Don't use me as a gun, right? I'm not a gun to be pointed at people. So yeah, Lynn.
I think the interesting thing about Butcher too is that you start off the show looking at Butcher as the hero. Like he is set up in the beginning to be the hero. And then through the course of the show, really, he's paralleled quite a bit to Soldier Boy. His father was also the epitome of toxic masculinity, and Butcher keeps fighting against being like his dad, using misogynistic slurs all the time and disrespecting women because you're using them, and using violence to solve every problem, and being willing to take all the power you can get in order to do what you want to do. That's very similar to how Soldier Boy can't escape his own father's script of toxic masculinity. So Butcher hasn't done a great job over the course of 3 seasons of really breaking away. Although, again, we see him struggle again and again and again. We see Yui get through to him multiple times, but then he can't sustain it. He can't hang on to it. He falls back into that toxic masculinity script.
It really does put me in mind of something that was recently discussed here on this podcast. I think just last week or a couple of weeks ago, I had another one of my co-hosts on, and we talked about like the philosophy of villains, like why do villains do what they do, and what makes a villain a villain. And one thing we spoke about was like one often misconceived notion about villains is that maybe take like a Thanos or a Magneto or someone like that, and there'll be people who argue that they're not really villains because look at what they're trying to accomplish. They're really trying to do something that's for the greater good. And the thing of it is, it's not really your goals or what you want to accomplish. Is not really your ideals that make you a villain. Those can all be fine and dandy. It's what you're willing to do to get those things that determine whether or not you're a villain. And I feel like that on the inverse really describes Butcher to a degree, because he he himself, he does have his goals are very worthy. He wants to, for one reason or another, he wants to bring an end to Homelander and all these Supes because they are an inherent danger to society. But the things he's willing to do to accomplish that goal really kind of makes him null and void from being classified as a traditional hero.
And that's so realistic, though. I mean, we won't talk about current events, but if you just think about things that are going on in the world right now, like, yes, you could have a goal that might be a good goal, but if you're willing to do horrendous, horrible things to other people to get to that goal, then that doesn't make you one of the good guys.
Right.
Yeah. It's a question I think that the boys asks time and time again, at what cost? Right. So if you think like one of the real themes about the boys, if you think about it, is like safety and security. Like, so is our society, is the US, is the world like safer because we have the boys, right? Or I'm sorry, because we have
the Supes.
Right. So if you think like they even said, the media set it up by having these terrorist Supes from other countries, come over. And like, so I think the boys, writers and Eric Kripke, like they're so brilliant because they ask, well, what are you willing to give up for your supposed safety? Or what are you willing to give up for your supposed security? Or, what are you willing to give up for money? I mean, if we look
or
at
celebrity or whatever,
if you look at A-Train's arc, if you look at Stormfront's arc, there's a lot of people that want a lot of different things. and it's always at a cost. And then, like, I mean, A Train is such a great character because he pays a tremendous cost. Losing his family, psychological cost, like he really struggles, right? Because he doesn't want to see himself as a bad guy, but he really wants what he wants. And that's kind of the, what am I willing to do? Who am I willing to step on, to get what I want? But, A Train let Stormfront and Huey go at some time. There's the same thing with Deep, and like there's all these struggles. Everybody wants something. Like that's the great thing about the boys. They're really talking about, well, what do you want, and kind of what are you willing to do to get it? And I think, Quentin, you hit the nail on the head when you said, like, the villain is really the one that doesn't care what it costs, or doesn't even feel bad. Like that's the thing that about Homelander that's so interesting. On some level, he doesn't give a shit who he has to. I mean, he literally destroys people, even that look like him. Right? There's that great scene where what's the name of the character that can
Madeline? Oh no,
the one that can shapeshift.
Right.
I'm
Doppelganger.
Thank you. I was right on the tip of my tongue. Well, Doppelganger actually changed it. Like, oh, I know what you want because you're such a narcissist. Like, you can make love to yourself. But Homelander's so upset that he'll even take out himself, and like Lynn said, take out the people that he loves the most. And it's such an interesting twist to be like, yeah, like, even though I love and care for these people, if they get in my way, I'll take them out.
Or if they betray me, like he's so fragile and so hyper vigilant for abandonment that as soon as he thinks that somebody doesn't really love him and is going to betray him, he preemptively just takes them out, which sometimes means just killing them because he can't stand that threat of abandonment.
Black Noir is the greatest example of that, right?
Oh, wow. What a tragic story. I love that in that chapter in the book that Tina Charles wrote, that she also talks to Nathan Mitchell and gets his perspective on portraying Black Noir, because I think, I mean, that character will be back, or Nathan Mitchell will be back anyway. We don't know exactly how, but there's so much more to explore there. I feel like we only just touch the surface of Black Noir's story, and it's so tragic and so fascinating. I really hope we get more of that.
Yeah, I do too. Again, so many of these characters had such these interesting arcs, right? And when they come around full circle, or they have these excellent moments, I want to come back to Black Noir, but for example, there was a moment where, like, you watch season 1 of The Boys, and I'm like, man, A Train, like, this guy's he's just the worst, and then by season 3, I'm rooting for the guy, and I feel genuine sadness when at the end of, I think, Herogasm, he could be perceived dead, after overexerting himself. Like, man, what an ending for that character it would be. But thankfully he's still around and has more to do.
Yeah, he's another one that I really hope we see more of his journey. The chapter that Asher Johnson did on A Train, I thought it was such an interesting, as a Black man himself, he really took like a cultural view of A Train's journey and followed it through actual cultural development theory. And I thought it was so interesting how he slotted A Train's journey as a Black man through these sort of phases of development. And again, a heartbreaking arc, because he does make progress through, like, he really does. He there's a point where he's like, I'm going to embrace my identity and I want to actually do good for my family, for my community. And then he gets lured right back in by, the promise of celebrity and money and things that he really felt that he didn't have and he wants. So it's another one of those really tragic arcs. But I wonder where it could go, because as you both pointed out, we've seen points where A Train, he really did see clearly what was going on. And he does have a conscience. He is not a total narcissist. So I wonder if there's hope for him yet.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because again, you watch episode 1, you're thinking, what redemption is there for this guy who just murders this poor innocent civilian and keeps it going,
and then he kills his girlfriend, and like
pop quality.
Yeah, pop clause. But that's again, you bring us such interesting points because like we can see Frenchie, we can see Mother's Milk, like they all go through these arcs. I mean, Frenchie basically let children burn, right? But did he really? Like these things are so nuanced, and that's why Lynn and I love this because that's what life is.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely. And just looking back really quick at the chapter that was done on A Train, I had the opportunity to read through that chapter as well, and there were some very interesting and very real and deep topics there about uh, about black people as celebrities, and about the cultural aspect of being black, but also wanting to up your status. But what does that mean? And then
Mhm.
partially not being accepted again by the black community because of your decisions. And all throughout the show, we see A Train play that kind of game, where
Mhm.
he's trying to do this balancing act. And Asher, I believe, is the name of the gentleman who wrote that
Yeah.
chapter. He also mentions how A Train, and he is correct. Like, he's one of the few characters that was either erased or gender swapped for the show, along with Stormfront and Mallory and
Mhm.
like
Yep.
two others.
Yep.
And I say this with all due respect to Garth Ennis and Derek Robertson, because they're fantastic, and I love their work. But this is one of the few cases where, as good as their comic book work is, the TV show is that much better for me.
Agree.
Yeah.
It's
And
it's also updated. I mean, there is the time element there. There's one of the chapters that we have is from a filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker who kind of hung out with that crowd back in the day, and she sort of writes about what the culture was like, in the 90s and the early 2000s, and it has been a long time, so it needed some updating. And I agree with you. I think it's more powerful and more timely.
Mhm.
absolutely. Now, with that being said, if I time traveled, 20 years ago and gave, 15-year-old Quentin a copy of The Boys, I would think it's the greatest thing ever.
Oh no, it is. It was
Yeah.
great. It
Yeah.
was. It is.
Absolutely.
I
And
don't
that's
I don't think the comic was meant to be the commentary on society and human psychology that The Boys is.
Not as
And
much.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I think it was like Lynn said, it was a different time. I mean, like you like you said, Quentin, like it really tries to hold up a mirror, sometimes a funhouse mirror, to the society in which we live in, and I think they changed the characters and they changed the themes and they changed the kind of course of action to reflect that. They're trying to say something about the world,
right.
and the world of 2023.
Yeah, and that is a good point, because 2023 is a vastly different world than the early 2000s when that book was coming out. And
Mhm.
also, it was just the book was just meant to be fun, and to kind of
Yeah,
parody modern superheroes at the time, more so than
right.
to speak on society. And so that is true. The book and the TV show are trying to do two different things,
Mhm.
and but they do pair extremely well together. Uh, I want to talk a little bit here about the kind of the social aspect of this show again, and I mean that from like a social media aspect, because we see that it plays a huge role in terms of the show. Now, obviously, social media when the comic book was being written, it wasn't really a thing. I think we had AIM back then,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
but that was about it. But in terms of the TV show and how it relates to today, we have so many different social media apps, whether it be Facebook or X, or Instagram, any kind of reels or stories, things of that nature, that we can kind of keep tabs on one another and see what's going on in the world and going on with one another. But there's also the negative aspect of social media, which is there's a lot of um, fake narratives, or there's a lot of negativity. There's a lot of what they call keyboard warriors, people who say extremely mean things online, but in real life, they probably actually have a cordial conversation with you.
Mhm.
Then there's all these different types of things that play a factor into how people perceive social media. And you compare that to the Boys TV show, and there's so much of that that is kind of uh, they put again kind of that funhouse mirror to social media, right? So whether it be Annie in season 3, just exposing VOT and things that go on with that, in seeing how she's speaking her truth, and it has a huge influence, but not to the point that we think it would, right? Because social media is at a point now where it can only influence people so much, but people will still pick and choose what they want to see and kind of interpret. How do you guys feel this show did in terms of showing their version of social media and how it impacts society?
I think they show it in a pretty biting way, but again, I think it's pretty realistic. I mean, that the scene that you described when Annie takes over her own social media to speak her own truth, that's one of the rare examples on the show where we see social media used in a positive way. It's mostly pretty glaringly negative, whether it's Stormfront, she came on as the social media expert, but it turned out she was not exactly using social media in a positive way at all. We see how Vought uses social media and media in general to just absolutely craft the narrative that they want out there. And the average person, the way the Boys universe portrays it, the average person is stuck in their own little siloed information, and you don't get the feeling that they are really getting any other disconfirming information. Like the case of Todd, who's married to Mother's Milk's ex. You watch him go from sort of the standard suburban kind of dad to being kind of radicalized and drawn in by all these misinformation campaigns and becoming like a rabid Homelander supporter. So, and that other scene that you talked about with the guy who's living in his mom's basement, sort of some little poke at fandom stereotypes there, Kripke. How he got radicalized, and both of them come to really do some horrible things because of it. So most of what the Boys universe has to say about social media is pretty negative, but there is a lot of the research that's coming out now shows that it is having some harmful effects on people. Not that it can't be a good thing. I'm a big proponent of, fandom plays out online, and fan communities are really good for people and can have a lot of benefits for people. But there's definitely a risk of some very negative stuff with social media.
Oh yeah, it's social media is a lot like a lightsaber. In the hands of a Jedi, it's a tool, but in the hands of a Sith, it's definitely a deadly weapon.
Oh, I think I'm going to steal that. I like that.
I think the other thing that you have to kind of consider about social media, and the Boys definitely touches on this, like never before have we been able to see into the soul of every single person on the planet. Right. If you think of, when I grew up, I graduated high school in 1984. I probably knew 50 people fairly well, maybe like that's it. Like nowadays, somebody can gravitate to or find heartbreak with somebody that lives in California or Utah, and if somebody wants to kind of share their story, and they'll share it, and people will share to get likes. I mean, that was over the last 15, 20 years. That was a huge thing. Like, oh, I got 1 million views or 1 million likes or so the Boys does a very good job of saying like, wow, now we have exposure. And the Boys talks a lot about like, well, what if like, you think of A-Train or others, like, what if we showed everything that you did? Right. Because everybody's trying to hide what they do. Like, and that's such a great kind of complexity of the Boys. They want to hide everything, that they did poorly. And they want to show, like Homelander wants to be shown as this, but he literally, like they all on some level, but he literally throws this poor girl off the roof. And he's more worried about somebody taping it or somebody finding out that he did something bad than about the event itself. And I think that says a lot.
It shows the addictiveness of it. I just heard on the news that somebody's or a group of people are suing Meta, Facebook, for like being addictive to young people. That's something that The Boys shows. It shows how addictive you get an endorphin rush when you get 500 likes on a post. So of course people are going to keep wanting to do that to get that endorphin kick.
Yeah, and that is kind of I mean, obviously that's the dangerous side of social media, right? Seeking that constant validation and that constant kind of endorphin high. But that's kind of what. Oh man, what is her name? She's like the PR rep for Vought. She started ripping her hair out towards the end.
Oh, Ashley.
That's Ashley.
Now she's the CEO.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and she's in Gen V.
She's in Gen V too. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. What a fantastic character she is.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
But this book, Supes and Always Heroes, coming to a store near you. This book also it does such a great job of like looking at these characters, not just at where they were, but where they are now and how they got to be where they are now. Because like as we mentioned earlier, so many of these characters have evolved or to a degree grown over the years on the show. So who has been your favorite character arc to experience? Like which character have you seen that had like the most exponential growth for you? We'll let you go, Lynn.
I think I have really enjoyed Starlight / Annie's evolution. There's a chapter that's all about. There's a couple chapters that focus on Starlight, but I really like the one that traces her evolution from being early on shaped by her mother's prioritizing of putting her daughter out there, getting fame sort of vicariously through her daughter, turning her into a Supe, sacrificing her marriage, Annie's father being gone because of what the mom did. And you don't see a whole lot of it, but every time you do see it, it's so powerful. Like there's at one point where childhood Annie is supposed to go on stage and perform, and she's in pain. She has, I don't remember, a stomach ache or something. And her mother gives her the explicit message of suck it up. Don't let anybody know you're feeling that. You go out and you do what you have to do. And it's extreme because it's fiction, but it's also super realistic. So many people, and I feel like not only women, but certainly women get a specialized flavor of this, of it's not about how you feel. It's not about what you want. It's about the face you put on and present to the world. And you don't let people know when you're hurting. You just go out there and you keep doing what you have to do. And Annie's evolution is little by little starting to not buy into that anymore and starting to realize, wait a minute, I do have choices. I can make my own decisions. I'm not buying into this anymore. I'm going to be more real. I'm going to be genuine. That great symbolic moment where she throws her costume down the garbage chute and says, "That's not me. I'm Annie. I'm not a Supe. This is not what I want to do." I think she has a fascinating evolution, and the way she negotiates it with her mother, who also appears in the show, and the conflict between them and how they also evolve in their relationship, I think is, for the boys, kind of surprisingly hopeful, but it also doesn't gloss over what a hard evolution that is.
I always thought that Annie's growth has been maybe the most understated, right? Because hers is so personal, and for me, I think that kind of makes it maybe that much more powerful. So like hers in comparison to others maybe isn't so outward, but I think that's kind of the beauty of her arc, is that there is like a lot of interpersonal growth that she had to do, going from being like this the teen version of the superhero group that she wanted to be a part of, to finally making it into the 7 and realizing that, oh, this is not what I thought it was going to be at all.
Yeah, right from the get-go.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. What it's like Matt said, what do you have to sacrifice to get to that place that you thought you wanted to get to? What are you willing to do to other people to keep that position you thought you wanted?
Right. And I feel like maybe, and the show never really explicitly said this, but I feel like maybe Annie looked at Queen Maeve and thought that, man, that is what I have to look forward to.
Absolutely.
And,
yeah. And I love the way the two of them sort of evolved kind of in parallel, because, by the end of season 3, Maeve is also deciding, what's actually really important to me is this relationship that I almost lost forever because I prioritized other things. And again, for her too, it's not about being a Supe anymore. It's about the relationships that she actually cares about.
Right. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, VOD is a business, and a business is, they only have so many things in mind, but typically helping out the little guy isn't really one of them.
Well, it's funny, in one of the chapters, Lincoln we talked about this, that who's the ultimate villain in The Boys? Vought is the ultimate villain in The Boys.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
Scott's chapter. Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
That's right. Scott's chapter. Yeah.
So Matt, what about you? Who, in your opinion, has had the most?
Yeah. I don't know about growth, but I think that Huey's arc is so interesting, and and what makes it so interesting is because he really struggles with good, bad, right, wrong. I mean, he has some great kind of like when he blows up Translucent, like you could see that was like the instant where he went to the other side. He was no longer this kind of naive, go along with the flow boy. Like, he literally just blew up at one of the 7. And then you can see him go back and forth, kind of good, wanting to do good, wanting to be good, and being okay with like maybe not being that strong. When he started going out with Annie / Starlight, it was like, yeah, you can be the strong one. I'm okay. And in that way, that was really strong masculine characteristics. But then he like started saying things like, well, the good guy never wins, and you have to be powerful to get on top. And I don't know if I, want to be the weak person anymore. And then he goes back, like, it's amazing. So then when he and Starlight go kind of cross country, there's this great scene where they're in the car, and he talks about, like, he didn't know what kind of real strength and masculinity was until he thought about his dad, because he really thought his dad was really weak and what a piece of milk toast he kind of was. But then he realizes, like, my dad stayed and he made Hot Pockets for me. And that Hot Pocket line just sticks in my head, because that's what real strength was. That's what real masculinity is. It's like being the single dad, being there for Huey when he most needed it, and not leaving. But then Huey goes back, like, and he has this struggle, and then he takes Compound V, because he has to feel like he has to fight might with might. So I just like I find his kind of not flip-flopping, but kind of, going back and forth, and kind of like, who am I and what do I want to be? And I just find his character so fascinating.
It's realistic, right? I mean,
Yeah.
People's evolutions don't just like go straight up with it. It's like,
yeah, you're right. It's about figuring out what works for you and figuring out who it is that you want to be, and so much of that for Huey, because you can tell for so much of Huey's life, it's kind of been finding someone to hand the leash to. And, I mean, whether it be, someone like Butcher who, manipulates them one way, or, whether it be someone else. But the thing about Huey, especially in season 3, he finally comes along to the point where he realizes that I have to figure this out for myself. I can't allow myself to be influenced. I have to do this because this is what I want to do. So it's not about Butcher anymore. I mean, he loves Annie, but for his personal growth, it's not even so much about her. It's about him realizing what he wants to do and how he wants to grow. And, thankfully, he still really wants Annie to be a part of his life. And so they have to figure it out together now. I think it's pretty amazing. Before we wrap up here, because I don't want to take up too much of your guys' time here, I want to ask you guys specifically, like, what were some of your favorite chapters or moments from the book that were touched upon?
Um, I mean, I love every single chapter. I think we were so incredibly lucky. I kind of handpicked the people who wrote chapters in this book. So most of the people who wrote chapters are someone that I already knew, and I already knew what a deep thinker they were. And so I'm so grateful that almost every single person we asked said, "Oh yeah, I love that show. I want to write a chapter." So I love the combination that we have for contributors. But I will say I do feel really lucky that we had some of the actors be willing to give us exclusive interviews, which are really in-depth interviews. They also got so incredibly thoughtful about their characters. Jensen Ackles and Aya Cash and Jim Beaver and Derek Robertson, like they really went there. So I think that I really value and was surprised by, I don't know why I was surprised. I've worked with actors before. They do tend to be very deep thinkers about their characters, but I'm continually surprised by just how deep they want to go in talking about it. So I'm really grateful that the four of them took time to do these exclusive interviews that we could include in the book. It gives you a perspective on what it was like inhabiting those characters that there's no way to get other than from the actors, I think.
Yeah, I would kind of agree with Lynn. Like, I think those were kind of some of my favorite, and they're all excellent chapters. I think it depends on what you're interested in. I mean, that's the great thing about the book, whether it's whatever character is like you are like, I think it really depends on who your favorite character is. We take a deep dive into most of the characters. But I guess one of the chapters that I liked the most was the one on Vought and social media and kind of capitalism. And it's so intriguing because you have Amazon, who is this big, huge, company that basically can get anything to your door in a second, whether you're in California or Pennsylvania. I probably have toothpaste coming in a second, but and yet they put out a show that talks about the evils of having this corporate entity that has everything from your morning coffee to I remember Butcher one time, I think he's got a busted eye or something, and he pulls out a thing of Vought peas from the
Yeah.
freezer. And he's got Vought, so Vaught's everywhere kind of thing. So that was actually one of my favorite. And it wasn't necessarily about like a character per se. It was more about commercialism and companies and things like that. But
Yeah.
and again, I agree with Lynn. I think Jim Beaver and all those guys, those are some of the more, they really give you an in-depth look at the show. It's like opening a door, right? Into the show, which it's kind of a treat in all honesty.
Yeah, and again, I haven't had the opportunity to read the entire book, but man, so here's the interesting thing about this book here, Supes Ain't Always Heroes, is, and my audience knows this. I have like sometimes the mentality still of like a 12-year-old. You know what I mean? Where like I'm still just, maybe in some of the best ways, I don't know, but I'm still very, very young at heart, and I still love to just, whenever I have the time, just delve into a comic book, and then just kind of sometimes overanalyze it, break it down or whatever. But every once in a while, a book will come across me that tricks me into reading it. A few years ago, a friend of mine gifted me a book called, I believe it was called Batman on Psychology. It's about the psychology.
Oh, that's Travis Langley. I wrote Supernatural Psychology with him.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And small world, man, that's awesome. But Batman is my favorite superhero, and so this book was gifted to me. I knew I had to crack it open, and my first thought was, "Oh, there's no pictures in here. There's no
right
booms." Joking, but I started reading it, and I found myself, I couldn't really stop, and I was fascinated with it, and I had the same feeling when I was reading through this. Like, this is fascinating. Supes Ain't Always Heroes is, I think, a book that, I mean, there's so much in here that I think a lot of people will really benefit from, because it'll really open your mind, and it'll also really kind of help you explore maybe some emotions that you're feeling and you don't know why.
Mm-hmm.
And the TV show does a good job at getting you to think, and this book does such a great job also of getting you to kind of analyze why you may feel a certain way about certain characters or situations, or help you understand for you what certain things means. And I think that's really what I love about this book. So many different perspectives and viewpoints on so many different topics that this show does a great job covering. So yeah, I just wanted to say, so again, thank you guys for being on here and for co-editing such a phenomenal piece of work. It does officially hit shelves on December 5th, is it?
Yes, it's available for pre-order now, and if you pre-order, the publisher gives you free original artwork of Kamiko and Soldier Boy. So if you think you might want it, pre-order it and get the freebies.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of exclusive type artwork, so that's a given for me for sure, for sure. Matt, Lynn, thank you guys for being on again, and thank you guys for this excellent work that you've produced. Do you guys have any final thoughts or comments that you want to share?
I just hope that people enjoy this book as much as we enjoyed putting it together. I think every single one of our contributors really wrote their heart out and just took an amazing deep dive. I learned something fascinating from every single chapter, and I also really enjoyed writing my own chapters and reading Matt's chapter. So I hope this will enrich people's experience of the boys and the boys universe.
I absolutely think it will. You know, one of the homies, the people who religiously listen to this podcast, one thing that they really enjoy is learning about the source material for something and then going and watching the movie that is based on, because it feels like they have a little bit of insider baseball going on and they understand maybe certain character motives or thought processes. I feel that if they were to read this book, Supes Ain't Always Heroes, and then go back and watch the Bulls at Gen V, I think it would really enrich and enhance their viewing experience. I know it has for me. I've gone back and I've rewatched some of my favorite episodes just to kind of mirror some of the things that are being said or written in the book, and it's been fascinating. So I really think that'll help out a lot too. Again,
Awesome.
yeah. Matt, Lynn, thank you so much. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and really thank you guys for your time and for being on this podcast.
Our pleasure. Yeah, thanks so much for having us and for the great questions too.
Yeah, it was fun.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I had a blast, and I look forward to this book having its official release date. And again, I think that the listeners here, they love the boys, so I think they really love the book. So yeah, it's going to be amazing. So thank you guys again, all the homies listening. Thank you guys for listening in. I know that you guys have been riveted by this. Because you guys are just as nerdy and as darkly humored as I am. So yeah, they absolutely love stuff like this. But that's going to be all for this episode. I look forward to talking to all you guys again. But until next time, this has been Dr. Matt. This has been Lynn, and of course myself, the homie Q. I will see you guys all again next time. So until then. All right.